Okay, we're going to do our Blaise Pascal reading time. It's June 13th, and hope you guys are well. The topic that Blaise is going to get into here that we're going to talk about is indifference. So, what I wanted to do was first kind of help us define this lack of interest, concern, or sympathy, or of unimportance. Okay, so that's kind of the idea of indifference. And he's talking about an indifference towards the things of God specifically. So, and then there's some passages I wanted to just read real quick. One of them says in Ezekiel 3:7, "But the house of Israel will not listen to you." Well, they will not listen to Ezekiel. "For they are not willing to listen, because all the house of Israel have a hard forehead and a stubborn heart," right? Not willing to listen. I don't want to. Having that kind of indifferent attitude, right? It's not of that importance for me to pay attention or to listen to. There's some other cool passages that I was looking at. Romans 3:11 says, "No one understands, no one seeks for God." Right? They're concerned about other things, but maybe not the things of God. And Blaise will talk a little bit about that. And then I found one in Ezekiel that I really liked, or Ecclesiastes. And that's a good book for you if you're just out there and you want to read a book. Just read Ecclesiastes in the Bible and you'll get some interesting stuff there. Much dreaming and many words are meaningless. Much dreaming and many words are meaningless. Therefore, fear God. So there's a contrast there, right? The idea of fearing a creator, fearing God, and the idea of your dreams or your many words. That there's something that we can be involved in that actually we can be missing the mark if we don't have something primary before the establishment of the secondary. So Blaise, I'm going to just start reading from Blaise on this issue of indifference, and you guys could chime in anytime by just listening. It says, "Nothing is so important to man as his state," mankind of course, "nothing more fearful than eternity. Thus the fact that there exist men or mankind who are indifferent to the loss of their being and the peril of an eternity of wretchedness is against nature." Okay, so he's saying that thus the fact that there exist mankind who are indifferent to the loss of their being and the peril of an eternity of wretchedness is against nature. So it's against nature not to be indifferent, right, about the things of eternity. With everything else, they are quite different. They fear the most trifling things, foresee and feel them, and the same man who spends so many days and nights in fury and despair at losing some office or at some imaginary affront to his honor is the very one who knows that he is going to lose everything through death, but feels neither anxiety nor emotion, right? So the same person who fears for their life in other ways has not put it through their head to now think about maybe the loss of all things in death, right? So they're much, he sees a disparity that you can be concerned about something here on the planet, something relatively near to you, like losing an office, a job, or things like that. You can be worried about that. But then the same person's not worried about death at all. And he sees that as a misunderstanding. Something's not right there. Okay? So, hey, good morning! And it says, it is a monstrous thing to see one and the same heart at once so sensitive to minor things and so strangely insensitive to the greatest. It is an incomprehensible spell. a supernatural torpor that points to an omnipotent power as its cause. So there's something going on. He calls it an incomprehensible spell that someone would be sensitive to the minor things. Mankind's nature must have undergone a strange reversal for him to glory in being in a state in which it seems incredible that any single person should be. So he says something must have happened within us human beings to where we have it so flipped, where we're so focused on the here and now that the eternity seems to be not even a concern. So that's what he's getting at. That there must have been some. It seems like the natural thing, the correct thing would be to think of the eternal or the potential of eternity, since that is a long time compared to the short amount of life that you live. That you would be more concerned about the after than and what happens after than what happens in the short, and that our minds would be focused on that. So he's saying something must have happened to our nature that has reversed this weight to be put on the shorter than the longer, right? Eternity being the longer. So he says, yet experience has shown me so many like this that it would be surprising if we did not know that most of those concerned in this are pretending and are not really what they seem. They are people who have heard that it is good form to display such extravagance. This is what they are calling shaking off the yoke, and what they are trying to imitate. But it would not be difficult to show them how mistaken they are to court esteem in this way. So what he's getting at is, in his experience, he says it would be surprising if we did not know that most of those concerned in this are pretending and are not really what they seem. Meaning, we always seem to have a backstory, something that's really pulling us, that people really aren't really what they seem to be. They are people who have heard that it is good form to display such extravagance. So people that say certain things, they say things that seem to mean well. They seem like they're really focused on something that's important, but really there's something else going on. He says this is not how. This is not how to acquire it. Not even, I would say, among worldly people who judge things sensibly and who know that the only way to succeed is to appear honest, faithful, judicious, and capable of rendering useful service to one's friends, because by nature men only like what may be of use to them. Wow, that's gnarly, right? God, what a bummer to know that that's the way we are, or to think that's the way we are, right? But this is what he says. He says people pretend all the time, and they pretend to be people of, all these things, but they really, in their hearts, they're only doing it because they're looking at people to use them in a specific way. He says in a way that benefits them. Now, what advantage is it to us to hear someone say that he has shaken off the yoke? That is, he does not believe that there is a God watching over his actions, that he considers himself sole master of his behavior, and that he proposes to account for it to no one's but himself. Does he think that by so doing he has henceforth won our full confidence and made us expect from him consolation, counsel, and assistance in all of life's deeds? Do they think that they have given us great pleasure by telling us that they hold our soul to be no more than wind or smoke, and saying it moreover in tones of pride and satisfaction? Is this then something to be said gaily. Gaily. He says, is it not on the contrary something to be said sadly as being the saddest thing in the world? So he says, there's people that say, oh yeah, I don't need God, or, gosh, and they want to offer you counsel and they want to be your friend. But he's saying, but they're not looking at the most important thing. They've refused to look at the most vital fact of all things, and that is their death, and that is what happens after. So he's saying there's something missing here. This person wants to be my confidant. They want to be my counselor. They want to be my assistant in all of life's needs. They want to be my consolation, but yet they don't look to the most important fact at all. Instead, they say that throwing off God is a good thing, and he says they say it with pride and satisfaction. If they thought seriously, they would see that this is so misguided, so contrary to good sense, so opposed to decency, so remote in every way from the good work they seek, that they would be more likely to reform than corrupt those who might feel inclined to follow them. That they would be more likely to reform than to corrupt them. So they think they're going to reform people if they follow them. And that's how people are, right? If you follow me in my ways, then you'll really be doing the right thing. And we tend to go that route and think that way. And Jesus, of course, had these moments with the religious people of his day as well, where the religious people of his day were so illogical in their thinking that he called them the blind leading the blind, right? Will both not fall into the ditch. And indeed, let's see. Let me get into that. Okay. So, if they thought seriously, they would see that this is so misguided, so contrary to good sense, so opposed to decency, so remote in every way from the good work, good form that they seek, that they would be more likely to reform than corrupt those who might feel inclined to follow them, and indeed make them describe the feelings and reasons which inspire their doubts about religion. What they say will be so feeble, so cheap, as to persuade you of the contrary. As someone said to them very aptly one day, "If you go on arguing like that," he said, you really will convert me." And he was right, for who would not shrink from finding himself sharing the feelings of such contemptible people? Thus, those who only pretend to feel like this would be indeed unhappy if they did violence to their nature in order to become the most impertinent of men. Impertinent means rude or irrelevant of men. If they are vexed in their inmost heart and not seeing more clearly, they should not try to pretend otherwise. It would be no shame to admit it. There is no shame except in having none. There is no sure sign of extreme weakness of mind than the failure to recognize the unhappy state of man without God. There is no sure sign of an evil heart than failure to desire that the eternal promises be true. Nothing is more cowardly than to brazen it out with God. Let them leave such impiety to those ill-bred enough to be really capable of it. Let them at least be decent people if they cannot be Christians. Let them, in short, acknowledge that there are only two classes of persons who can be called reasonable: those who serve God with all their heart because they know Him, and those who seek Him with all their heart because they do not know Him. As for those who live without either knowing or seeking Him, they consider it so little worth while to take trouble over themselves that they are not worth other people's trouble, and it takes all the charity of that religion they despise not to despise them to the point of abandoning them to their folly. But as this religion obliges us always to regard them as long as they live, as being capable of receiving grace, which may enlighten them, and to believe that in a short time they may be filled with more faith than we are, while we, on the contrary, may be stricken by the same blindness which is theirs now. We must do for them that which we would wish to be done for us in their place. So our response to such a person, he's saying, is to be gracious, right? And he says, and so what we would want to be done for us in their place. So do unto others as you would have do unto you, and appeal to them to have pity on themselves and to take at least a few steps in an attempt to find some light. Let them spend on reading about it a few of the hours they waste on other things. However reluctantly they may approach the task, they will perhaps hit upon something, and at least they will not be losing much. But as for those who approach it with absolute sincerity and a real desire to find the truth, I hope that they will be satisfied and convinced by the proofs of so divine a religion, which I have collected here, following more on this order. Before going into the proofs of the Christian religion, I find it necessary to point out how wrong are those men who live unconcerned to seek the truth about something of such importance to them and affecting them so closely. So what is affecting people so closely, Pascal keeps getting at, is the idea of eternity, that their death. That's what it is. So of all their aberrations, meaning all their illusions, right, all their thoughts, right, it is no doubt this which most convicts them of folly and blindness, and where they can most easily be confounded by the first applications of common sense and by natural instincts. For it is indubitable that this life is but an instant of time, that the state of death is eternal, whatever its nature may be, and thus that all of our actions and thoughts must follow such different paths according to the state of this eternity, that the only possible way of acting with sense and judgment is to decide our course in the light of this point, which ought to be our ultimate objective. Okay. So if you don't have this ultimate objective in mind, then what is the consequences of it? Well, you no longer, Blaise is saying, is acting reasonable, because you're not putting weight on what is the ultimate objective. Instead, you've lost track in your reasoning. So you might be focused on this situation or this issue, right? But you have thrown out the weightier issue, which is to balance this other issue, the secondary issue. So what he's saying is that death is eternal no matter what state it's in. Is that true? Yes. Right? It's eternal, meaning when you die, that's it. From here on, that's all there is. So if that is true, and from death on, we know that you ain't coming back to this, then what Blaise is getting at is this idea that whatever nature it may be, he's not debating that right now, whatever nature that time from death on is, he says if we know that that's a fact and that's empirical truth, so he's saying if that is true, and that is surely true above all things, and it can be shown as fact, then he says all of our actions and thoughts must follow such different paths according to the state of this eternity, and that the only possible way of acting with sense and judgment is to decide our course in the light of that point, which ought to be our ultimate objective. So looking at that idea of, okay, death is eternal no matter what state it's in, so therefore all of my actions must take into account that idea. And that's why, you read in the book of Ecclesiastes things like, much dreaming and many words are meaningless, therefore fear God. See, the weight is put on the idea of the ultimate objective, the ultimate eternity, right? The time of death on, right? So Jesus would say it's kind of like this too. Don't worry about those who kill the body, but worry about the soul, right? The eternity of the soul, right? And if you know death is coming up at some point, then that is what needs to be, then you need to have that situation figured out. You need to weigh that would be of ultimate importance. This other stuff is the secondary. And it can only be really looked at clearly through a search in the primary. And so, you read wonderful. We've been on our staff. We've been reading great preaching by Martin Luther King Jr. And some of his most amazing, talks are about hate, and about that if you don't deal with hate with God, see, if you're not dealing with the eternal, if you don't have the eternal going on, the issues of eternity, the issues of God, the issues of what if, then what happens is you become exactly what you are set out to destroy. Meaning if you hate, or if you find something, an injustice being done, then what happens is if you don't have the eternal things worked out, then you literally become as a human being exactly what you have chosen to fight against. So those that you hate with the sword, you destroy with the sword. And so you could see where we get off balance unless someone looks to God. How Martin Luther King saw it is you look to the forgiveness of Christ and you deal with the eternal matters that need to be dealt with. Where am I going for eternity? Where am I going to rest? Where is my security of everlasting life? Is there is a pursuit of everlasting life a good pursuit? Is it a worthy pursuit? Well, Pascal would say death is eternal no matter what state it is. It's the most important pursuit. But if you don't get that right, then what happens is, though you seek to do the right thing, right? And that's what he's talking about in this section with this man he's talking about, right? This pretending, where you try to do the right thing, you seek to do the right thing, but indeed you become the most impertinent of men, right? You become the most rude, the most irrelevant. Because you become exactly what you are trying to wipe out, trying to get rid of. And so it's Animal Farm. That's what it is. It's Animal Farm. So read some Orwell, I guess, and you'll maybe see how that works, right? We can run it, and we can run it better, and that doesn't work if you don't deal with something that Pascal's saying, which is the weightier issue. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that Pascal time. I know that was a lot of reading, but I hope you got something out of it. Okay, you guys take care. Have a great one.